Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for another day of our series here. It's Salt Awareness Week at the Jamaica Library Service. All right, today I told you that we'll be kicking things off with a different spin. So we're going to move away a bit from focusing on salt consumption or sodium consumption and knowing what it is. I mean, we've got the granular information. So today we're going to turn things up a notch. Today we have with us Miss Nicole Foster, and she's going to present to us today on the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child and the Right to Health and Nutritious Food. So basically, today we're looking at it from a human rights perspective to know what we're eating. All right. So Miss Nicole Foster, she's an attorney at law and deputy dean at the Academic and Student Affairs at the Cave Hill Law Faculty at the University of West Indies. She holds a degree from UWI, and she has a higher degree in law, in international law and international organizations from Cambridge University and Washington College of Law, respectively. Ms. Foster's areas of specialization are public international law, international human rights, and international trade law. She's a former diplomat who acted as counselor in the Permanent Mission of Barbados to the United Nations and the WTO, World Trade Organization, from 1999 to 2005, primarily covering dispute settlement, agriculture, and intellectual property. Besides her substantive post at the University of West Indies, Ms. Foster is also a policy advisor with the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, and she has been working closely with key regional stakeholders such as the PAHO and CARFA to accelerate CARICOM's response to its NCD epidemic. So ladies and gentlemen, everyone here on Zoom, over Facebook Live and YouTube, let's now welcome Ms. Foster to go ahead and give us her presentation. You're muted, Ms. Foster.
Thank you, Chair. That seems to be a perennial problem. So thank you very much, Chair. Just give me 1 second and I will share my screen. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. All right, so as the chair correctly said, we are going to be looking at the issue of nutrition and the focus on less salt, more flavor from a sort of human rights legal lens. And our focus for these purposes is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I have here just a brief outline. We're going to talk just a little bit to orient you in terms of the defining characteristics of human rights, and then zoom in on the convention itself, the Rights of the Child Convention. Mention a few of the related rights that are relevant in the context of our discussion, but then really focus in on the right to health and nutritious food, and round that all off with a linkage to the very current activity that's taking place in Jamaica right now as it relates to front of pack labeling and what that has to all do with human rights. And then just some concluding comments. So there are these basic elements. So we all hear these terms, oh, we have human rights, but exactly what are we talking about when we say we have human rights? We're saying that these rights are universal, that they're indivisible, that they're interdependent, and they're interrelated. And what that means basically is that we can't think about one set of rights in isolation of others. And therefore, while from time to time we may choose to focus on a particular right, the entire human rights landscape remains very important if we're supposed to if we intend to make the type of progress that we anticipate in terms of the respect for what happens as we respect human rights. And a key document here is the Vienna Declaration of 1993. So we've been discussing human rights for a long time. And so quite back in 1993, we actually had all of our governments come together and make this really important declaration about human rights. And what they said in paragraph 5 was, all human rights are universal, indivisible, and interdependent and interrelated. The international community must treat human rights globally in a fair and equitable manner on the same footing and with the same emphasis. While the significance of national and regional particularities and various historical, cultural, and religious backgrounds must be borne in mind, it is the duty of states, regardless of their political, economic, and cultural systems, to promote and protect all human rights and fundamental freedoms. And that's really our launching pad. So the idea is, of course, we recognize that in Jamaica, for example, your local circumstances are very different to perhaps what obtains in the United States of America. And so it is recognized by the international community that we can't necessarily require everybody to move at the same pace or to implement these rights in exactly the same way. But what we're clear about are these elements, that they're universal. So regardless of our particularities, they apply across the board, that they're indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. And so from that point of view, it is not open to governments, to states, to seek to avoid the obligations that they have as in terms of international human rights, based on saying, well, that doesn't work in my context. So what specifically then are we asking states to do when we say they have a duty to protect and promote human rights? Well, the obligations are pretty simple. The obligations across the board for all states are an obligation to respect human rights, an obligation to protect human rights, and an obligation to fulfill human rights. So what do we mean by respect? Respect, basically what we're saying to states is you mustn't take any action. You yourself as a state must not take any action that would interfere with or limit the enjoyment of the human rights that your citizens are entitled to. In terms of protection, the obligation to protect, we're saying to states, you must ensure that individuals and groups' human rights are not abused by others. So now this is not action that the state has taken, but we're saying still you as a state, even though it's not you that is carrying out the abuse, you have an obligation to ensure that others don't take actions that will undermine vulnerable groups, individuals, human rights. And then finally, in terms of the fulfill obligation, what we're basically saying to states is you as a state have to take concrete positive action to facilitate the enjoyment of human rights. So it's not sufficient for us to just talk about it. It's not sufficient for you to just say, yes, Jamaica or Barbados or CARICOM even is committed to the fulfillment of human rights within our region. It is really critical that you actually take positive, concrete action to realize that. And that leads us very conveniently into our focus for today, which is the United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child. So just a little bit of background about this convention, which is now about 30, well, this year would be 31 years old. So it was adopted by the General Assembly in November 1989, and it entered into force in 1990, the 2nd of September. All states, and this is really, this is a phenomenal convention. It was one of the most quickly ratified conventions internationally, which just speaks to the level of consensus and agreement that we have as states, as international community, about the importance of children and how much we want to ensure that our children are able to live their best life ever. And so pretty much every state in the world right now, with the exception of the United States, has ratified this convention. And so it means with ratifying this convention, it means all of us, with the exception of the United States of America, have binding legal obligations as a matter of international law in terms of the promises that we have made in the text of this agreement. And I note here, I said all states in the world, but besides the US, have ratified it, which means, of course, that every single CARICOM member, including Jamaica, is a state party to this convention and therefore has binding international legal obligations under the convention. So what then, let's just focus a little bit on some of what the convention has to say that is relevant in the context of these efforts by the Heart Foundation of Jamaica and other health stakeholders in terms of trying to address the problem of childhood obesity, which we know is a real challenge within the region, not just in Jamaica, across the board. In Barbados, which is where I'm from, is as big a problem as it is in Jamaica, unfortunately. And so let's look to see what elements in the convention maybe help us in terms of explaining some of the actions and the priorities and policies that these health stakeholders, such as the Heart Foundation of Jamaica, have been pushing recently. So one of the first important elements of the convention that I want to draw to your attention is an underpinning principle that informs everything that takes place in the context of the convention. Every time we interpret it, any obligation that is involved there has to be looked at through this lens. And the lens is the best interest of the child principle. What do we mean by that? The convention says that in every decision we take, every policy we implement, every action we take, we must have as our primary consideration the best interest of the child. Then we also have within the convention specific provisions relating to the right to health and adequate nutritious food. But you would remember that I was saying to you just now, in terms of human rights, that human rights are interrelated and interdependent. So pretty much all the rights that are included within the convention interlink and support each other in terms of providing that full picture of what is needed for our children to live their best lives. But in terms of the right to health and to adequate nutritious food in particular, there are a few that stand out in particular. And I mean, no one right has priority over the others, but just in terms of what we're focusing on, there's some that particularly jump out at us. And what are those? The right to life, because clearly we can't have life without health. The right to survival and development. And so we talk about the child's right to survive and grow in a particular way. And that obviously links back to health very directly. And then equally the right to an adequate standard of living. And clearly, to the extent that your health is undermined, to the extent that one doesn't have access to adequate nutritious food, one cannot say that our children are living and have an adequate standard of living. And so these are the key rights that I wanted to draw to your attention in the context of the convention, in as well as this principle about the best interest of the child. But what I'm going to do next is to just turn to look specifically at two of these provisions that relating to the right to health that really bring together our discussion as it relates to health and the right to nutritious food. So the article in the Convention on the Rights of the Child that speaks to the right to health is in fact Article 27, or 24, I'm sorry, 24. And what does Article 24 say? It says, states parties recognize the right of the child to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health. And then it goes on to say, states parties shall pursue full implementation of this right, and in particular shall take appropriate measures. And one of the things that they highlight is the need for governments to provide healthy, to facilitate provision of adequate nutritious foods. Then when we look at Article 27, the Article 27 begins by recognizing that states have that children, have the right to a standard of living that is adequate for their physical, mental, spiritual, moral, and social development. And so you can see very clearly immediately the linkage that to health, because you can't live your best life, you can't be fulfilled physically, mentally, spiritually, morally, and socially if you are unwell. And that would be physically or mentally. And it then goes on to say that state parties, in accordance with national conditions and within their means, shall take appropriate measures to assist parents and others responsible for the child to implement this right. This is the right to an adequate standard of living, and shall, in case of need, provide material assistance and support programs, particularly with regard to nutrition, clothing, and housing. So I just highlighted that paragraph because it brings home again the importance and the stress that is being put on nutrition in the context of enjoyment of rights more broadly within the Convention on the Rights of the Child. But let's just switch back to health, because really that's our focus. That's the core provision here for our purposes. And just to explain to you a little bit about the provision and how it works, because that's a lot of legal language that I read to you just now from Article 24. So let's just try to break it down into ordinary layman's everyday language. So what are we saying then in terms of the obligation to respect, fulfill, and protect the right to health under the Convention on the Rights of the Child? Well, there's a committee called the Committee on the Convention for the Rights of the Child that has the power and the authority under the United Nations system to sit down and reflect on and comment on and provide guidance on how states should understand the obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the kinds of steps that they need to take to be able to implement it effectively. And so this committee is something called a general comment, which is General Comment 15, took some time to explain from their perspective what the right to health means, involves, and what might be some of the obligations, the concrete steps that states need to take. And so they start off by making it clear that when we talk about health, that provision has a broad scope. And they have interpreted it in particular as an inclusive right, extending to a right to grow and develop to that is children's, full potential and live in conditions that enable them to attain the highest standard of health through the implementation of programs that address the underlying determinants of health. And so you would understand, therefore, the linkage to much of the advocacy that has been being carried out by the Heart Foundation of Jamaica as it relates to, now in Salt Week, Salt Awareness Week, lowering our intake of salt because we know the impact that has on our diet and on our health overall, but just also as well all the other aspects of their advocacy, whether it's heart health, reducing how much sugar intake you have, etc. And this is all linked back very directly to the right to health, because we see here the Committee on the Rights of the Child saying that what we want to do is to ensure that when we talk about our children enjoying their right to health and us taking the steps that are necessary for that to happen, that we have actually created conditions that our children live in conditions where their right to grow and develop to their full potential and live in conditions that allow them to attain the highest standard of health is available, is what obtains. So the committee then goes on to say specifically, so they provide that broad guidance, say this is an inclusive right. We don't want you just focusing on one aspect of health rather than another. You have to look at it holistically, comprehensively, and address the totality of the child's life and experience. And so the committee then went on to explain specifically that in terms of those obligations, remember I told you that states have the obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill all human rights. They focused in particular in the right to health on the protect and the fulfill, because we don't really tend to see states taking themselves actions directly that would undermine children's right to health, like deliberately seeking to take actions that they would know undermines the child's right to health. But what we may find is that they don't take the action that they need to ensure that that right is protected fully, or that they fulfill fully those obligations. And so they focus particularly on that aspect of what states have to do. And they said, in relation to the right to health, states therefore have to take action to prevent third parties from interfering with the right to health, including by protecting marginalized and vulnerable groups in society. And then equally, that states need to take action to facilitate, provide, and promote the conditions in which the right can be fully realized. And so you see the linkage between the state's obligation to protect and fulfill, and what has been highlighted by the committee, and then some of the policy asks that we have been seeing the Heart Foundation of Jamaica and others making of Jamaican government, but also governments regionally, as we said, because this is not a problem solely of Jamaica, that asking them to take particular actions. So if I just go back very quickly to our pictures here, whether it's front of pack labeling, whether it's increasing the taxes that we have on our sugary beverages, whether it is taking actions to make our schools places where they are healthy schools zones and we have healthy food options for our children, it means that these are all actions that would be consistent with states' obligation to protect and fulfill. Because now you're saying, the government is saying, you vendors, you food manufacturers, you beverage manufacturers, it's important for you to operate in a particular way, because that is an important part of protecting and fulfilling the child's right to health. And we recognize, of course, as well, that in a school setting, there are particular obligations. We would appreciate that in that small space where we have all of these vulnerable individuals, which we understand are children to be near and dear to our hearts and in need of protection, that we would expect in the school environment in particular, that we would see strong regulation taking place, such as to ensure that at the very least within the school environment, we can say confidently that our students, our children, our guards, our wards, are given up the best opportunity possible to fully realize their right to health. And I just want to close off this aspect of looking at the convention as it relates to the right to health, but this little comment that sort of once again supports what I am saying in terms of the committee taking a position that is consistent from an international law point of view, them taking a position that is consistent with all of what the Heart Foundation has been trying to do over the past few years in the context of their advocacy throughout Jamaican society. And what the committee said is this: states should also address obesity in children, as it is associated with hypertension, early markers of cardiovascular disease, insulin resistance, psychological effects, a higher likelihood of adult obesity and premature death. Children's exposure to fast foods that are high in fat, salt, or sugar, energy dense and micronutrient poor, and drinks containing high levels of caffeine or other potentially harmful substances should be limited. The marketing of these substances, especially when such marketing is focused on children, should be regulated and their availability in schools and other places controlled. So almost word for word matching much, if not everything, that the Heart Foundation has been pushing. So you see very much the strong grounding from an international human rights perspective for all the work that they've been doing. And I know, I have 2 small kids. They are not keen with the restrictions on the fast foods, etc. We know they all taste good, but we also know that everything that tastes good is not necessarily good for us. And so this is why we would be trying to restrict and control your access to and exposure to these products as children. I wanted to there now move from looking at the convention itself and what it says in terms of grounding much of the work of the Heart Foundation of Jamaica to look at concretely one recent initiative that the foundation Heart Foundation just launched last week that very much speaks to what we're trying to achieve here in terms of a rights-based approach to health and nutrition, grounded in the Rights of the Child Convention. And this picture might look a little bit, certainly these octagons should look a little familiar to you. This picture, maybe not so much so. I was trying to find one from the Heart Foundation itself, but I didn't find one. So and this is their front of pack labeling scheme. And y'all would have seen their Right to Know campaign, the brilliant campaign that was launched just last week. And what does this front of pack labeling have to do with anything? What does that have to do with health? And how does that link into a rights-based approach to dealing with health and specifically as well nutritious food? And basically the right to health and the right to information are linked into the front of pack warning labels. Why? Because if you think about it logically, when you see this label here, that's going to cause you to stop and think, right? And what does it make you think about? It allows you as a consumer or your parents, for those kids in the group, it allows you or your parents, consumers generally, to make more informed, healthier food choices by providing a simple, easy to understand nutritional label. So straight off, you look at these products and you know straight away these products are problematic. And some are maybe more problematic than others, depending on the number of octagons that we have. So it's very clear, not difficult to comprehend at all. So even at the level of a child, my 7-year-old would be able to go and very easily pick out what's a better choice for him. Then it also, in so doing, you become more aware of what's in your food, of the foods that are high in fat, salt, and sugar. And then hopefully the idea is that with that knowledge, you are then empowered to make better choices and you move away from these choices that have been so directly linked to our poor diets and by extension to our very concerning levels of obesity, including childhood obesity within the region. And you don't have to take my word for it. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health last year in July 2020 explicitly stated that front of pack warning labels are a rights compliant response, are an important way of states taking the necessary action to protect and fulfill and realize the right to health. In this case, the right to health of our children is what we're focusing on. And so they said one such measure, so the previous special rapporteur on the right to health has encouraged states to take measures to provide accurate, available, easily understandable, transparent, and comprehensible information to enable consumers to make informed choices towards healthy diets. One such measure is the adoption of front of pack warning labeling on healthy food and beverages. This is in line with states' obligation to protect the right to health because food that is not labeled may be harmful as it prevents consumers from making healthy and informed choices. And they go on, then I won't read this paragraph as well in the interest of time, but they basically go on and expand on that and show you exactly, as I was saying just now, how it is concretely, it provides us with that information that we need to make better choices. And so that brings me pretty much to the end of my presentation today. I wanted to conclude, I thought it appropriate to conclude with a quote from the Heart Foundation's launch of their Right to Know campaign. And so they say, the Heart Foundation of Jamaica is calling on the government, and I would say here, I'm calling on regional governments to implement mandatory, easy to read and understand front of package labels on all packaged foods, which will assist our citizens in making healthier choices. We all have a role to play in building a healthier nation. What's in our food? Give us the facts. And let's, ladies and gentlemen, kids, let's all commit to more flavor, less salt. I thank you very much. And of course, I'm open and happy to take any questions persons may have.
Thank you so much for that in-depth, enlightening presentation, Miss Foster. So there we have it, guys. We know about our right, our human right to know what it is we are eating, and the right to access safe and nutritious food, right, by Miss Nicole Foster. So now we open the floor to any questions, comments, concerns. You may go ahead to put them, for those of you on Zoom, you can put them in the chat. And in the meantime, I'll, do routine duties to check Facebook and YouTube to see if there are any questions coming from the public. Still, I see we still have people joining. No comments or questions from Facebook, but I do see people showing love though.
Wait. Oh, that's something.
Yes. No questions on YouTube. Anyone on Zoom with any questions or comments, concerns for Ms. Nicole Foster?
I take it that everyone is all on board and supportive. So I expect that you are going to go out in full force and support the Heart Foundation's push and let your government know that you want these front of pack labels. You want them to implement measures that will allow you to make better choices about what you're eating and all of these sorts of things. So I hope to see great things happening in Jamaica in the very, very near future.
Indeed. I saw, there was a reaction from Miss Andre. She was giving you an applause. Any other question, guys? I'm going to give that just another minute, just in case there are any delays on Facebook or YouTube. All right, still nothing. So I take it that we're all as clear as mud. And so we'll just go ahead to end this session right here. And I want to thank everyone for joining us here, taking time out of the day. I mean, especially at this time, but it's because of the time zone and everything and the schedules. But thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us here. All of you on Zoom, over there on Facebook and YouTube Live. And we'll go ahead and thank you so much, Miss Nicole Foster, once more for that presentation. So we'll now go ahead to close off today's session with our usual jingle from our campaign. And, okay, yes, Andres, thank you. So tomorrow we'll be here at 10 a.m. again. We will be looking at the whole salt awareness theme, more flavor, less salt. This time we'll be having some cooking tips on how to cut back on the use of salt. And we'll also feature the makeover of a popular Jamaican dish. This will be by Miss Frances Mafood. She's a nutritionist with the Heart Foundation of Jamaica. So that's tomorrow at 10 a.m., same place. All right, so I'll go ahead to play that jingle as we close out.
Food sweet, but you know what you eat?
Me glad the ox cause it not funny. Not funny. Me say help while you more than money. If no fun healthy things in the bag. Put a warning on the front label, not the back. Enough sugar where you add. Put it on the front label. Enough salt where you add. Put it on the front label. Only for fats where you add. Put it on the front label. We don't want search for the facts. We want the warning on the front of the pack. We don't want no heart attack. We want stay on track. Put it on the front label, not the back.
A message from the Heart Foundation of Jamaica, Ministry of Health and Wellness and partners.
All right, thanks for joining us, everyone. So keep safe and be good. Have a wonderful day.
Okay, thanks everyone once again. Take care. Bye.